So today we're gonna jump into Lightroom, and I kind of want to show you guys this image that I had done for a restaurant called Cheesy Melts. So I kind of want to run through the basics of the Lightroom parameters with you guys and stuff like that, and how I edit, just to make sure that my photos pop. Right now, this is what the image looks like with my edits on it, but we're gonna reset everything and we're gonna start from scratch. And while we're doing that, I'm just gonna run through these basics with you guys. So we have the temperature. I don't even have to really touch that, but this is basically for your white balance. This basically allows you to see the true color of what your image looks like in real life. 90% of the time, if you have an area that's gray, you can click on it and it will show you the most accurate color of what the image looks like out of camera. Now, if you have your camera adjusted to different kelvins or on different, like on auto white balance, it could change every photo. I like to keep everything on the parameter of flash within my camera. But anyways, I'm not gonna really jump too much into that. We're gonna start with the exposure. You can see it's a little dark. Your exposure adds light. If you do add too much, it's gonna definitely overpower it. It's gonna look like it's gonna be blown out, and we don't want that. So we basically wanna find a perfect medium, a perfect balance for a good starting place for where we feel like the image can go. So I'm gonna raise my exposure up a little bit. Contrast, usually if you notice, if you bring it to the left, it makes the image a little flat, and if you bring it to the right, it starts to desaturate a little bit and it makes it overly punchy. Now you can see as I bring it all the way to the right, it seems like it's a little too much, it's a little overboard. So I'm not even really gonna like adjust this too much. I'm really probably just gonna add a little bit of contrast, just because I feel like it definitely adds a little bit of punch. Exposure, basically, it adjusts the overall brightness of an image, okay? So I wanna bring this up. Look, if I do this overexposed, we don't want it to be overexposed. We want to bring in basically the perfect amount of light for a starting place for where we feel the image is gonna go. If you get your exposure right in camera, you don't really have to worry too much about bringing it up too much. But for this shot, we're just gonna bring up the exposure a little bit, okay? So I'm gonna bring it to like 155, right? Contrast basically increases the difference between light and dark. If I bring it to the left, you could see that the image gets a little flat. If I bring it to the right, you can see a little bit more detail, a little bit more texture, but it looks overblown. It's a little too much. Editing, you'll start to realize that everything is good in moderation. You want to do things just in little bit of increments. It's the same thing with photos. So you don't want to OD with the contrast. You kind of just want to have everything balanced. So I kind of like this image with a little bit of contrast. So I'm about to bring this to maybe like number 7. I'm not even gonna OD too much. So highlights basically controls the brightest part of an image. So if I bring the brightness up, you can see where the highlights are. You can see that it basically enhances those areas. Now I like to basically bring my highlights down. If I have my highlights up, you see a lot more glare, and as I take my highlights down, you start to see the texture of the dessert a little bit more. Now you don't want to bring it all the way down because it's gonna basically suck the life out of it. You still want to be able to see that little highlight here on the left. We're gonna bring the highlight to like a mid area, probably around like 56. Okay, highlights, like I said, it can prevent glare, and it's very good for product photography, especially when you're using glassware and stuff like that. So you got your shadows now. Your shadows basically adjust the details in the darker parts of an image. So look, let me bring this darkness down. You see back here in the image, you see like how it's dark back there. It basically makes it more dark. Okay, so I don't really want it to be dark. I want this picture to be a little bit more vibrant. Like the edges of these images had red on it, so I definitely want to like show that a little bit more rather than just having it there in the background. Part of the way that you get a lot more detail and get a little bit more shine, for me, is adjusting the shadows. I just feel like it just brings out the color a little bit. I'm gonna bring up the shadows a lot just because I like how that looks. So right now, this is what we had before. This is what we had afterwards. Now let's play with the whites and the blacks. Basically, it sets the brightest tones on the whites, and then like the black adjusts for the darker tone. So let's bring up the whites a little bit. It's kind of, in a way, it almost mimics the highlights, where you see where there's a highlight here on the chair and whatnot. You see that this basically enhances that. Wherever there's white, those parts of the image are enhanced. I'm just gonna kind of bring it down a little bit, like minus 22, maybe like 20, minus 18 to 22. Again, blacks, they just adjust the darkest tone. So if I bring the blacks to the left, you notice that wherever it's dark, it gets more dark, and this looks horrible. This doesn't look good. All right, and it's the same thing now. If I bring the blacks all the way to the right, you start to lose a little bit of contrast, and you notice that the blacks are a little bit more flat and the whites are a little bit more flat as well. And sometimes there's a time for that, but I'm gonna adjust that a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of bring this up to like maybe around like 30 into the around the 30 area. After that, I like to adjust my textures. Textures basically enhance the soft and fine details of the image. If I bring it all the way up, look, let me zoom in just so I can really show you guys. Look, so texture, look, it basically makes it soft a little bit. So when you have texture, whether it's on product images or food images, it basically increases the texture to emphasize details on certain parts of the image. So you don't want to OD, like I said, again, with a lot of these, you don't want to exaggerate everything. I just want to add a little bit of sharpness. And so by adding a little bit of sharpness, I'm just gonna bring it around 9, okay? Just gonna bring it around 9 just to add a little bit of pop. Clarity basically adds mid-tone contrast, creating a punchy and crisp effect in the images. So look, if I drag this all the way to the right, this is the thing, you could exaggerate it a lot and you'll notice there's a lot of contrast, a lot more detail, and a lot of punch, which could be cool. But a lot of the time, most of the time, people will notice that, like photographers and stuff like that, and other creatives, they'll notice that sometimes it's a little too, the texture is too sharp and whatnot. So you don't necessarily want that. Again, moderation is key. So this is just gonna make it pop a little bit. This is what we're getting so far. I feel like I could bring back the highlights a little bit. Dehaze. Dehaze basically removes or adds atmosphere. It can boost contrast and make images appear sharper. Let's say like you're in a restaurant and you use haze, for example, you use smoke. A lot of the time it can interfere with the camera and it could basically make like the image a little bit foggy. You could use dehaze to kind of get rid of that. But this definitely adds a little bit more contrast into the image, and sometimes you may not want that. So again, same exact thing. If I bring it to the left, image gets a little bit more flat, flattens the blacks, and flattens the white. I would keep this around like 6, okay? So this is what we're looking like so far. We get a little bit more life out of this shot right now. So what do you guys think so far? Looks good? Looks good? Cool, let's keep going. Let's move on to the universal curve tool. So how does the curve tool work? Basically, the curve tool, like when you adjust the upper area, it basically adjusts the highlights, and when you adjust the lower areas, it basically adjusts for the darker tones. Okay, so I'm gonna bring this up a little bit. As you can see, bringing up the, let's exaggerate just so I can really show you guys. So if I was to bring the highlights all the way up here, you're really seeing how much exposure is added. So when you bring the curve tool up, the curve up, it basically adds exposure, and when you bring that curve tool down, it takes away from the exposure of the image. So you don't want to over exaggerate. Again, I know I keep saying that, you don't want to OD, so you basically want to just adjust the upper part. So we're going to kind of do like an S curve right here. We're going to adjust up here just to add a little bit of highlight and a little bit in the mid tones. And then we're gonna bring the blacks down a tiny little bit, all right? Just to bring a little bit more depth to the image so it looks a little less flat. Like if I bring this down here, like I said, it's the same exact thing. It basically just crushes the blacks. So you don't want that. You just want it to be a little bit, just to add a little bit more depth. So S curve is one of the most popular type of curves that are used when it comes down to food photography, product photography, I would say even portraits in general. I think we're pretty good right here, to be honest. It already looks way more vibrant than it did in the beginning. You got the HSL, you know, you got the hue, change the colors of the reds to more maroons or more orange if you move it to the right. We don't really want that. I think the colors are pretty good where they're at. I want to kind of keep the exact tones and the exact colors of what were in the image when we were shooting. I'm gonna leave this alone for the sake of showing you guys. If I adjust the reds and the saturation, it's obviously gonna bring the saturation up more. If you bring it to the right, if I bring it down, it basically sucks the color out of it. So that those red tones are basically are becoming more dull. So saturation, remember, in order to add more color, you bring it to the right. Saturate to add less saturation, you bring it to the left. Basically sucks the color out of the yellow. So we don't necessarily want that. I might bring it up a tiny little bit. And then luminance basically adds white to a color or adds black. So if you add more white, the brighter that image gets. And I kind of like to adjust these a lot because, again, it just adds a little bit more life to the image. So I'm going to bring up the yellows a little bit more just to really exaggerate those. I don't want to do too much. And when there's a lot of yellow and red in this image, and it just, you know, it feels a little bit more inviting. So this is what we have originally, and this is what we have as basically a final edit. Obviously, when it comes down to color grading, this adds different colors into like the mid-tones and the highlights and things of that sort. So that's not really what we're trying to get into right now. I'll probably add some sharpness. If I click on option and drag the mouse, it basically adds a little bit of sharpness into the details and not necessarily the overall image. So add a little bit of sharpness. Let's just see like up close what that looks like. I don't know if you can really see. If I add up the amount, then you'll really start to see what a difference it makes. So sharpness really adds, again, a little bit more pop, a little bit more life into the image, and a little bit more details. Like let's say you kind of misfocus a tiny little bit, like your aperture was open a little bit too wide. This is not really a fail safe, but it does sharpen up the image a little bit more compared to like if you were to shoot and have the image a little bit softer. It adds a little bit more detail instead of your image being overly soft. We have the calibration. We don't really have to mess with this right here, but this basically just creates more accurate colors if need be. This photo I feel like is yellow enough. I don't wanna do too much. I think we did a pretty good job of this edit. So again, this is what the image was looking like before, and this is after. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, let me know. If you like it now, you love it later. Peace.